Okay, so this is the last of the 4 systems for lifestyle medicine, or just better healthcare in general practice. This is the Tree of My Life Medical Visual History. So if you've not yet watched the 10-minute introduction, how this came about, the basics, please go ahead and make sure you've watched that first. We're going to try to get into more of the details. Brief recap, the core concept of this model is that of a visual, timeline-based, causation-oriented health history. It includes an immediate ancestry, taking into account genetics, epigenetics, through to the present lifestyle and health conditions. This may feel less defined, and it is basically that. That's a normal experience or perception. It is intentional, and that will make more sense as we go through this. It will depend on how you will best use it in your practice and what the issues will and won't be, which is part of why it is flexible and not incredibly defined. The concept is that we create the visual timeline, you rotate it 90 degrees to the vertical, and you see that it is a tree. A person has roots coming up through to birth, adolescence, adulthood, and we end up with the fruit or leaves that we currently experience. People get it. They understand the tree concept very readily, and it is extremely helpful for providing insight, understanding dynamics, and so forth. So first of all, what is the context of how we normally do healthcare, the typical medical history process? The typical history process is focused on physical facts. So it's a gathering, it's a data collection process, and that's not bad, that's fine, that's good, we need the physical facts. We are focused on the physical level, at least at the surface, in healthcare, but keeping in mind the whole person perspective. We will often get a few of the behaviors, smoking, alcohol. If you're really progressive, maybe you're asking about exercise, or you're in a system that's using exercise as a vital sign. We'll get a little bit of social. It's usually kind of fill-in, not often that much used in clinical practice. And of course, historically, we've called as social history some of the behaviors like smoking, alcohol, things that are more obviously called chemical history, but they often do happen in a social context. Part of what we're interested in is understanding the social dynamics beyond just substance use. And think of this beyond just filling in the form, which is too often what the social section ends up being. Our typical medical history, our data collection focused on the physical, usually doesn't give us a lot of insight into the dynamics of this person and their life. It doesn't give us a good sense of the direction of their life. Directionality is actually a very important issue, very important dynamic. It doesn't tell us much about the why or causative forces shaping their health behaviors and thus their medical conditions. Now, the typical usage of this data collection of facts is to then take those facts that we first get, potentially get further facts, such as ordering lab tests, getting imaging, the diagnostic process, if you will, which is more facts, to then come up with the facts or options of a treatment plan, and then the ones that we're going to prescribe to the patient. Factually take this pill this often, factually do this treatment, whatever that may be. So it's very fact, 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 fact. Not necessarily negative. I'm not trying to be negative about facts. Facts are very, very important. We want to be very reality-based, but when we're focused only on physical level facts and not the whole person, it gets really problematic. So let's just recognize the way we typically do things, what its strengths and weaknesses are, and then seek to move to what healthcare could be and should be. It never significantly, if at all, addresses causation. Now, if you're clueless as to causation, how are you going to be effective at bringing about change? If you don't know what got us to this point in time, how do you know where to go? Now, there are some principles, to be fair, that are going to be fairly universal. We don't necessarily have to do 10 years of psychotherapy on the couch to figure this out. That, I believe, is a big conceptual myth in terms of what is required to engage with people to get good benefit. And yet there is a place for understanding and insight. We must start to systematically to understand the causative forces if we're going to do causation-based care. Lifestyle medicine is treat the cause. The surface cause is the behaviors, the nutrition, the exercise, but those are driven by the deeper causes, and that's where we need to get to. So the kinds of questions that the Tree of My Life approach or visual history is designed to answer are things such as, how did Mary come to be 400 pounds, diabetic, and needing hip and knee replacements? What got us here? What was that journey? What is the map of her life? Did she go over the mountains, around the sea, whatever it is, to just put that into visual terms? What are the dynamics of life that she has learned that have brought her to this point with these issues? So it's mapping that out to really understand. We've touched on this before, but it's important to realize, to keep in mind, that a lot of these things that we call bad behaviors are really adaptations. They're much better understood, not in a negative, judgmental, punitive sense. But why did people start to use pot when they were 13 years old? Why did they start smoking when they were 10? Why did they spend so much of their college years drinking? Whatever that may be. Or positive side too. If somebody had a really positive role model, maybe they're in Boy Scouts, maybe they're in Little League, whatever that may be, what are the adaptations that they learned that helped them navigate life, that helped them cope? Again, in the context of we're designed for connection, and we're designed to enjoy our existence, and when those aren't happening, we try to find something to either numb the pain or fill the void or whatever it may be. So, take a look at this Tree of My Life paradigm, if you will. We tried to make it very visually appealing. It's easy on the eyes, it's engaging for patients in particular, also very usable for providers. I don't know about you as providers, but I'm really tired of spending so much time looking at plain Jane text on a digital screen. And then I go to my smartphone, oh, that's interesting, that's visually engaging, that's what my brain likes. And then I have to go back to all our medical ease barrenness, if you will. Okay, so on the core Tree of My Life form or paradigm, you're going to see different symbols across the top and across the bottom. The fundamental concepts or aspects of a visual history that are going to be pretty much universal are going to be the physical impacts throughout this person's development and the relational impacts throughout their development. So I like to think across the top in terms of these are going to be things that are more on my mind. Across the bottom, they're going to be things that are probably more on the patient's mind. So medically, we're going to need to know all these physical details. And these are going to get into issues such as fetal alcohol syndrome. Did mom drink while pregnant with this individual? What has gone on physically from grandparents to parents to prenatal to birth and so forth? Tracing that through the whole process. Across the bottom are going to be relational impacts. Again, we're fundamentally here to connect, and we do that in the vehicle of our physical being. So these two areas are the core aspects or dynamics we need to get a picture of. In the relational area, what has shaped the family? What has shaped this person's relationships or lack thereof, positive and negative? And at what points in time? How much of this goes back to even before they were born, that they didn't have anything to do with, but those impacts have carried on and have been a big part of why they have ended up where they are. Now, there's a lot more detail you can do with this. And what I think of, what I imagine in my mind, again, I imagine the neuron picture in my mind for this person, I'm filling in the map. Now, when I do the Tree of My Life mapping, I'm picturing that person's neuron through time and relative to these different areas. So you might do it on different lines across the page of your mind. You might do it as one, but looking at different elements of the neuron. So let's just think through this. So as this individual, their ancestry is taking place. They're producing offspring, which is this person's parents. These parents get together and mom gets pregnant, and then there's the prenatal period where there's a lot going on that's going to impact this individual. And we've got genetic and we've got epigenetic things going on here. The things where the DNA sequence doesn't change, but the switches are turned on or off, which will impact the phenotype and the real-world experience for this person. Birth, adolescence, of course, we're learning a lot about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences these days, and their huge impact on physical health, not to mention health in the emotional, mental, and spiritual levels, relational health, and then through adolescence and into adulthood. So imagining this neuron through time, grandparents, parents, and if you're doing the single neuron process or timeline, if you will, what levels are being impacted in what ways with different events or dynamics? And we'll talk about some of these details in a minute, but I see things lighting up for the positive, lighting up for the negative. We hit this event or impact, and this happens. We hit this next stage, and this happens. Mom, dad, this happens. Prenatal, this happens. And so forth, all the way through the trunk, the branches, the tree, and so forth. And we end up where we end up with the lifestyle practices, the dynamics, and the health conditions that we have at that point in time. It's also really important to keep in mind that people are very dynamic. They have been shaped by what has happened so far, but it has been a very dynamic process. It's important to understand directionality, but it does not mean that you're stuck in that direction and that you can't change those dynamics. It's just how best to engage with the person where they're at to be most effective at shaping that going forward. Now keep in mind that lifestyle medicine is primarily for who? It's for the patient. Yes, it is important for the provider to understand how things came to be such a mess, and the good pieces too. It is even more important for the patient to understand, to give them that insight as to what has happened, where they're going, where they've come from, and that what they have done has largely been adaptive, to help them get out of that mode of self-condemnation and judgment and into a dynamic, a perspective, an attitude that is truly empowering, that is functional, that helps them actually do something with the energies they have, is what this is about. So let's talk about the best clinical use for Tree of My Life. Now, some may choose to do this with every new patient, assuming it's a non-urgent kind of visit. If you're having an emergency, of course, you're not going to sit down and do this. Take care of the emergency, the urgency, and then come back to this as is appropriate. But a non-urgent primary care setting or an intensive lifestyle setting, you may want to do this right up front. You may choose to use it on a subsequent visit, not on the first visit, and that can be just fine. It may be the first visit really just doesn't allow us to get into that level. With many of the constraints of modern healthcare, it's just not really that feasible sometimes to spend as much time as we would like, and we have to push some of that into other visits. Now for some patients, and I've been experimenting some with doing this, I may have them take it home to complete. I'm more comfortable doing that if the patient has a good functional level of engagement, if they have good insight capacity, and we've had some discussion about this. If they don't have insight capacity, we haven't had a lot of discussion, then I'm more likely to try to walk through them with it, or at some point we're going to create more directions, make this more independently doable. But that can be a good option. And actually, one patient I just had in the last week or so that came back had done a beautiful job filling this out. Granted, he was a mental health professional, but it was really helpful to him and to me in understanding the forces that had shaped his experience thus far and the issues we needed to deal with. Assuming you're doing this in the office, this may be something that you ask the patient to fill out on their own, or you do it with another staff member. If you have another staff member that you have oriented in this, that has received some level of training, gotten some comfort with it, they may be just fine helping the patient fill this out, understanding what we're looking for. You can do just big highlights. You can do a quicker, faster, big picture process, or you can drop that down to levels of detail. Again, depending on your practice setting, what the needs are for your practice type, your patient, their issues, and so forth. So this is intended to be that flexible. If you need to go high and light, or very deep and broad, whatever it is, you can do that within this framework. And again, going forward, we will increasingly have more guidance, some templates, some depth, and so forth. Let's talk through some examples. So let's say either I'm doing this with the patient or I've given it to them to take home. what kinds of physical impacts would we be looking for? Would we want showing up on this timeline? So from grandparents, what was going on with them nutritionally, physically, socially, anything that would affect their physical health, we want to know about. Some people grew up in areas of the world where there's a lot of poverty or nutritional deficiencies, either due to poverty reasons or due to other reasons as far as food availability. Some will grow up in areas where alcohol is a big part of the culture and may have had a significant impact or effect. And down through the parents. People growing up in contexts where people or the family are manual laborers, that's going to be a way of life. That's going to have consequences, ideally good, coming down through the generations. A child may grow up in a context where the family works, even where the children work, maybe in the fields, maybe in the backyard, maybe working in the family trade, or running errands for the family trade, or just for the household. There's a lot of different dynamics that impact the physical status. Did a child grow up out in the dirt, playing with the animals, running around in the woods? We're starting to learn about the lack of exposure to nature and how that impacts asthma and other immune-related conditions. The human body is designed for the dirt, if you will. So there's a lot of things shaping the physical forces over time for this individual. And don't forget especially the prenatal period. A lot of physical impacts can happen there, including from the mental side. Of course, the physical affects the mental and the relational affects the physical. I had a patient just recently who related to me some family dynamics that would be very significant on pretty much both levels, actually. This person's mother told them that their mother, the mother's mother, had a child, it was a girl, and mom didn't want another girl. So mom, from birth, rejected this child. Basically just put it outdoors and was going to let it die. Fortunately, the aunt comes along, picks up the child, cares for it, and raises the child. But this is in the same local area. So this child grows up with mom not being that far away and mom wanting nothing to do with them and being raised by an aunt. That's a major relational impact. That's going to have physical impact, and it's going to shape one's identity and sense of connectedness or disconnectedness, which again is a who or spiritual level issue. That is going to have a major impact, not only physically, but also mentally, socially, and on that who or spiritual level, that level of identity. Am I wanted? Am I considered valuable? Am I part of this family? Am I connected with these other people? Further looking at the relational timeline, if you will, what else were the family dynamics? Why was mom so cold and detached? Well, it's probably because she didn't have much caring as she was growing up. Well, mom then carries that on in her relating to her children. Mom cares for the children, wants to do a better job than she had done for her, but has not learned the skills, does not have the wherewithal within her to do that differently because she had to adapt, she had to do things a certain way to survive, to get to where she's at. This individual growing up has this lack of connectedness and support, and because of just personal mannerisms, from whatever reason, gets bullied a lot. Maybe it's a guy and they have more effeminate mannerisms. They get bullied all through school, including by adults. What is that communicating to that individual about who they are, their place in society? What kind of physical impacts might that have through this growing up process? It's probably going to shape things like, do they engage in school activities? Do they engage in sports? Who do they hang out with? What kinds of activities does that group tend to do or not do? So you see there's all these dynamics at play as this person, as this neuron is developing. So to follow through those fundamental close relationships symbolized by those symbols and the impacts that they have had at the different stages of this person's life. This Tree of My Life is especially helpful for emotional and mental health issues and the spiritual who level issues that aren't obvious with the physical, factual approach. Again, we tend to call it behavioral health, though to change behavior, we're really focused on the deeper levels. And we want to hopefully increasingly sort of clear up some of our terminology and actually call things what they really are. Whole person health, not just behavioral health. So we've touched on the neuron development at the WHO level. What are the forces, largely relational, and how other people perceive our identity that is then communicated to us as we develop, that we then take on, we then internalize for our own concept of identity, value, connectedness. Going forward, we're going to have forces shaping, obviously not prenatally, maybe somewhat, but primarily postnatally in terms of our mental status. How do we function mentally? What is in our memory bank? Again, if we have these relational issues in our memory bank, in our experience, that's going to have a big effect on how we think, what version of reality we relate to, what do we hold to be true and not true? What are the patterns of processing, the interpretations that we learn, that we develop? If we're getting bullied a lot, somebody looks at us funny, it may be just a nothing look, but we may start to interpret that as, well, that's more bullying. And that have a negative impact on us emotionally because we have this identity that is less than ideal, at least thus far with our experience in life. This is where we get into cultural shaping of healthcare literacy. So healthcare literacy is a big issue. Well, where does that come from? Well, if you grow up in a culture that believes in the village medicine man and the approach to healthcare and how health is produced or disease cured, that's going to shape your thought processes. Then when you encounter some other version of healthcare, be it Western medicine, let's say somebody grew up in the jungles of South America with a village medicine man, and you come up to Texas or something, or Minnesota, and you need healthcare, this is a foreign world. They're talking all these weird ideas. They're talking about studies and research, and they want to put needles in you that are like putting things in instead of letting things out, like they did back home, and it's just very, very foreign. That's at the mental level. That is where we understand reality, what is fact, what's true, what's not, how we interpret things, what meanings we apply to things, how it fits into our paradigm of life, and so forth. And then we get to the emotional level. Again, emotional level in our system, our functional framework, is pure emotion. Pure emotion is coming from the mental most directly. But we develop habits, we develop patterns, we develop neurological pathways in our physical bodies, and we groove them in. We cut a channel, if you will. It's like water flowing. The more the water flows through the channel, the more deeply etched it's going to become. The easier it will be for the water to flow through that channel next time. So we get into these emotional habits of how we process things and how the emotions rise and fall, both positive and negative of different types, that then empowers or impedes behaviors we do or don't want to do. So there's this emotion generation dynamic that is habitual, that we have learned, is etched in. It can be changed. Yes, it can be changed, and it is residing between the mental and the physical. So it has a very physical set of wiring, literal neurons, if you will. Keep in mind that these emotional patterns or habits are also the filters or glasses through which we interact with the world. Our mental part of our being, we view the world through this emotional filter. So we don't get a direct set of data from reality coming in through our senses. That reality comes to our senses and comes through the emotional layer to the mental or cognitive layer and is thus colored, twisted, shaped, whatever you want to call it. As we take our mental processes, decisions, and convert that into speech, into behaviors relating to the outside world and to other people, those go through that emotional layer and are colored by it back on the way out. And again, those mental processes will be significantly affecting, shaping, generating those emotions. They are the emotion. They are the impetus that goes along with our decisions to help carry them out, if you will. So let's talk about some case examples. Let's take our existing sample cases, Melinda with the hypertension, the diabetes, the obesity, and probable sleep apnea. What might we discover in doing the Tree of My Life visual history with her? And how is that going to impact my care for Melinda? Okay, so let's assume you've started to generate a context and relationship of trust and safety. She's starting to open up, she's willing to do this with you and talk about significant issues. What if you discover that as she was growing up, let's say during the childhood-adolescent period, ACEs, she was sexually abused by family members? What if in that process, relationally, others didn't believe her, did not support her, did not help her, but left her victimized? What if they even blamed her for the problems? That is far too common, far too common. Very, very negative dynamic. What is her self-image? What is her connectedness? What is happening to how she processes things mentally? What happens to the emotions being routinely generated? What if she has used food and becoming fat, obese, as an emotional escape and potentially even as a physical escape to not be so attractive and hopefully not be experiencing the sexual abuse so much? You telling her to eat broccoli instead of Twinkies? How effective is that going to be if you don't understand these dynamics and these issues? Forget it. You're wasting your time, your life, her time and life. It's going to be extremely important to understand these dynamics and issues to effectively engage with Melinda to help her lose the weight, which is a surface issue, to help her deal with the hypertension and the diabetes, and best treatment for sleep apnea, the weight loss. Proper use of this system should radically change your treatment plan for Melinda because you want to be effective. You want her to actually experience significant change and get significant benefit. Okay, what about Norm, our 52-year-old hard-charging executive who's watching his diet and exercising every day with the hypertension, the palpitations, periodic insomnia, and recent diagnosis with prostate cancer? What do you think his tree of life would look like? Did he grow up in a successful home? Is he a self-made man? What has gotten him the current state of health and disease and the lifestyle habits that he has today? And pay attention, sometimes the things, the dynamics that have produced the healthy behaviors are very unhealthy dynamics and need to be actually treated. And vice versa, there may be some not so healthy lifestyle habits that actually have some really good dynamics underneath that we want to recognize, embrace, and engage for the benefit of the healthy behaviors. So don't get too black and white in the process. Look for the deeper levels, look for the positives and the negatives all the way through this. So I had one patient recently who's actually a good example of this situation. Very successful executive, started with nothing, grew up in poverty, worked really, really hard, was in the Navy for many years, out on a boat, and he was very seasick sensitive. He was puking every day for years out on the boats in the Navy. But he says it made him tough. He pushed through, he learned to endure, to suffer, and to be okay with that. And he got out of the Navy, he worked super hard, education, business, so forth, and retired early as a mega millionaire. He still works out at the gym to the verge of puking and says that it feels good to push himself. He's doing some healthy behaviors with the exercise, but he's got some problematic dynamics going on that is going to contribute to other problems in his life if not dealt with well. Now, we don't want to just take that away and say stop exercising. That's not the point here. But to understand the dynamics behind the exercise, to recognize whatever is good and whatever is not so helpful here, and where we may need to go for next steps and to end up getting him a positive set of dynamics for all of the lifestyle behaviors that he chooses. And again, don't forget that not only are these deeper levels having an indirect effect, like on exercise, but they have direct physiologic effect. Chronic stress, cortisol, adrenaline, how it impacts the nervous system, how it establishes patterns in the autonomic nervous system, and so forth. Direct effects also. So is this gentleman successful in his lifestyle? Is he successful with lifestyle medicine? Depends on how you define that, how deep you go. If you want to work with him on next steps, are you going to push him to achieve goals with nutrition? He's already doing pretty good with that. What if you use the same dynamics trying to help him deal with stress? Well, he has a stress dynamic pushing him to do the good things right now. So what are you going to do? Use a stress dynamic to create more stress? Or to try to use stress to create unstress? Probably not. One of the fundamental things he needs to learn is how to rest, how to unwind, how to relax, how to shift his physiology into different nervous system activity, very different than what has been the norm for him for so many years. He needs to learn the skill, the dynamic, the physiology of rest. Through this process, keep in mind and keep coming back, at least in your own mind, if not out loud, back to those issues of identity and worth. And understanding that the physical clinical engagement is a tremendous therapeutic opportunity and part of your treatment plan. Your treatment plan should be founded on the therapeutic alliance and what you can do in that relationship. It is the core, it is the foundation, it is the heart. Use it, understand it, manage it. We're not going to be able to fix this person's childhood. We're not going to be able to fix their ancestry and the family issues, but we can communicate value. The very way in which we interact with, the fact that we give them 100% of our attention with no distractions communicates, I value you, I respect you, I'm 100% here for you. That is communicating worth. There is worth flowing through those relationship channels to the who of who they are. Now again, they may have barriers, it may take some time for them to feel safe, secure that you really care about them, but as that intention continues to be expressed toward them, the barriers will tend to come down, they will tend to relax, and they'll start to enjoy it. It feels good to be valued. It feels good to have someone recognize you, issues of identity, and recognizing them as a part of the human experience, the human family. Doctors are not different. Doctors are not God. They're not on some higher plane. Doctors put their pants on the same way as everybody else. They use the toilet the same way as everybody else. It's okay to be human. You do not have to be unprofessional to be human. There's no inherent conflict between being both professional and human with your patients, being able to relate to them on that basic human level. So the more that we as providers truly see that we perceive this person to be of worth, to be part of the human family, that I value them, I respect them, we are taking good care of them, we're trying to do for them what we would want done for us, basic golden rule kind of dynamics, the more they're going to have a sense of worth, a sense of identity, a sense of connectedness. That's what we're trying to build and develop as the core spring for the healthy behaviors we eventually would like to see them doing. What is the future? What is the direction for the Tree of My Life system? We will be developing more detail. We will be developing specific examples. We're going to be having sheets that people can fill out more in a text format relative to the visual to get the details in. You just can't get that much detail on the visual sheet. There's a lot to a person's life. The visual sheet makes us able to see the major impacts, to see the causation dynamics, especially as we turn it vertical and the patient sees it. Here's your roots, here's how things went, and here's why we ended up where we did. So that is incredibly useful for patients, which is our primary purpose. We may create different versions for different uses, such as different specialties, different provider types. We will likely have directions for the patients, so the patients can largely fill a lot of this out on their own. And again, we need to create the flexibility to allow adaptation for the different scenarios. It is really important to understand when we talk about patient centricity, that this is for the benefit of the patient. What does that mean in this context in light of our understanding of a whole person, in light of their life history? For whatever reason, We won't get into the existential issues here, but people often end up feeling like a loser. All kinds of self-doubt, identity crises, negative self-talk, negative tapes playing in their head. We all in the human condition struggle with this, including the people who are loud and obnoxious and boasting. They are often some of the most ill on the deeper levels, the most empty, if you will, or hurting. There are reasons, there are forces, there are reasons of adaptation as to why you have done what you did at these different points in time. It's not because you're just a stupid loser and your life is a failure. And as people start to understand that, and as we present a different perspective to them of their own life experience and who they are, transformation becomes much more possible, much more enabled and empowered. We want to communicate to our patients a definite, clear understanding of hope for the future. A different tomorrow is possible, and we can change the forces at work in their life. There are reasons that the forces have been what they are, why the water channels, the neurologic channels are what they have been, but we can start to shift the rivers, we can start to change the streams, we can start to etch in new patterns of our own choosing that will be much more health promoting, much more healthy on the deeper levels, and provide much greater satisfaction and pleasure for all aspects of our life, for all of us together. And this happens by us connecting healthfully, lovingly, truly with our patients and helping them connect with others and the rest of life in healthy ways.